Well, we are so excited, dare we say honored, to welcome back Elizabeth Stanley. Elizabeth went to Indiana University where she was a voice major, but then switched majors and ended up with a BS. We'll chat about that once again today. She's been on Broadway in Company, on The Town, Million Dollar Quartet, Crybaby, and Jagged Little Pill, for which she received a Tony nomination and a win in our hearts. She's also been in plenty of other things like Bridges of Madison County, the first national tour, Xanadu. She was just in 9 at the Kennedy Center, all over your TV screens, in Kindred on Hulu, The Equalizer, New Amsterdam, Gossip Girl, Blue Bloods, currently starring on P-Valley on Stars. She's also my wife, which I could not say on our first episode. She's the mother of my child and an all-around delight of human being. Elizabeth, how are you doing? Welcome back. Are you honored to be our first returning artist guest? We've had some colleges return, some faculty members who moved to new schools and come back, but you are our first artist to get to recur on the pod.
Wow. Yes.
It's an
Honored.
honor. Well, good.
Deeply honored.
You should feel that way, and it's only on your merit. It's not no personal connections earned you this honor. It's only true merit.
I believe that. I really
Mm-hmm.
believe that. Also, if you just want to call me Babe for the
Beb,
episode, Babe,
Beb.
because
Yep.
I feel like you messed up my name because it's so rare that you call me Elizabeth.
It's rare that I call you
Charlie.
Elizabeth.
You know
That's
what I
true.
mean, Charlie?
I do. I do. Well, I have to say, I was excited to have you back on because I did want to break that ice of returning artist guests. I have found it's been really interesting with some colleges having them back on, that we get into some deeper conversations. We'll see if you and I can break through our nonsense and get into some deeper conversations or not. But also because I feel like when we had you on, it was really a guinea pig style episode. It was the podcast was finding its feet with artists. I was still figuring it out in terms of what I wanted to ask in terms of questions, stuff like that. So we're going to try to get a little deeper than we did in our first interview. But for some folks who may have not, some folks probably have heard that episode already. Some may not have. For the most part, I'm going to say we're not going to repeat that info. Like we're not going to go back and do everything again. In that episode, we kind of talked through your college experience in depth. We talked through some of your post-college training. We talked through your pandemic and some of the jagged little pill of it all. But so listeners, you're welcome to listen back if you want to. But most of the stuff today, we're going to kind of move forward and have different conversations. However, this will be the only kind of repeat. For those who are listening for the first time, can I challenge you to do a super quick previously on? Basically, just can you give me a tight 90 seconds of your childhood through Indiana University experience in a tight, let's say 90 to 2 minutes, if possible. I won't set a timer.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I grew up in a very tiny town in Illinois, Camp Point, Illinois, to be exact. And I thought I wanted to be an opera singer because that was sort of like the example of a professional musician that I had through my voice teacher. So I sought out opera programs. I ended up at Indiana University. I loved it there, absolutely loved it there. Made some of the best friends in my life. While I was there, I got super excited by mostly the people I was meeting in the music theater realm. And so I switched up my major, which then ended up becoming a Bachelor of Science. I don't know, that's just what they called it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I graduated with. But I sort of hodgepodge together a musical theater degree. I moved to New York. I worked 1 million side jobs. I did a lot of regional theater. I made my Broadway debut about 6 years after I moved to the city. And then I've just been auditioning and going between gigs and side gigs ever since.
Well said. That was a great tight 90 and brings us maybe a little bit to where your Broadway experience began. You mentioned sort of your debut with Company. I'd love to hear, understanding that you didn't have especially a sort of traditional BFA training, but also I think we can say we're not a Broadway or bust person at 18. That you didn't think, hey, I know I for sure am going to have Broadway experience, or that Broadway was everything to me. I just love to hear a little bit of in your 5 Broadway shows, you might be able to come up with a lesson or a takeaway from each of them. And we can go as granular as you want. I'm happy to kind of go into specific shows if you want to, but just kind of all in all, what do you think was the experience of being on Broadway that you didn't know beforehand? So in the last time we talked about sort of some of the experience of cutting your teeth in the regions, but was there anything specific to Broadway that kind of you learned from working at that level?
I mean, I think my biggest oh, okay, this is what Broadway is. When I was doing Company, was that it just feels exactly like a regional show. Like it's the same process, the same you're learning your lines, you're doing your best, you're figuring out a role. The big thing for me, was just like everyone was the best.
Hmm.
You know what I like, and the best not the right word, because that makes it sound like there's a finite like thing you can be as an artist, but everyone was equally awesome. Um, Whereas I think, doing theater regionally, sometimes there are like people who like local people who maybe that's not their like one and only thing they're pursuing in life.
Hmm.
Um, which is cool in its own way, and same like when you're in college, I think there are lots of people who are doing it maybe more for fun, or they're not as serious about it, or everyone kind of has a different path. But definitely on Broadway, it really felt like most of the shows I've done, it felt like everyone was their
The talent level
dream.
was there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then what about like, was there a difference? Did you feel the difference between, you've played a lot of certainly characters and leading roles, but then as you moved into the crybaby of it all, as you moved into Jagged Little Pill, and you're saying, hey, I'm really leading a company, did you feel a difference in terms of what it was to watch, maybe Raul lead a company versus then going, what is my experience as I'm headlining or as I'm leading a company?
Uh, yeah. I mean, I think shows aside, I mean, I just think in life you're always aware of what leadership styles resonate. Which for me, it's someone who's very um, connected to every single person in the room. That's not, some people like someone who's very sort of untouchable and feels like, oh wow, I just want to be that if I could only like get to them. But I tend to like people who really feel like, oh, we're all doing this together, like because it takes every single person to tell this story. So I definitely aspired to be a leader of a company who was just kind of grateful to be amongst awesome peers rather than someone who was higher than anyone else.
Who likes people that are untouchable? You said some people like people that are untouchable. Who aspires to have a leader that you're like, I can't talk to that person. They are untouchable.
I don't know if they like it, but I think some people think like, oh wow, that diva must be
Uh,
like so cool. Or you sort of like that feels powerful, I think, to some people.
uh-huh.
Um, it doesn't feel powerful to me.
Mm, I like it. Yeah. What about the TV world? Like, I think a lot of young actors who are, go through this experience of maybe cutting your teeth on smaller roles and then kind of moving up to it. And you're definitely in a place of your on-camera career where you're getting to do more acting on camera in terms of some real roles. I know, including when you're currently filming. Like, what have you learned from being on set, maybe in those early moments when you had the few lines, and now as you shift to doing, hey, I'm doing a little bit more. What have you learned from the experience of being on set? Is there anything that you feel like, hey, now if I could go back and tell myself the first time I was on set this, what was that experience in terms of understanding, what those experiences are behind the camera?
I mean, for me, I think it's that when you're on camera, the performance that's being captured feels like rehearsal, because you haven't like done it a bunch of times. You maybe haven't even met the person until that day that you're doing your scene with. Um, so for me, that's a really different process. Like I liked in theater, I like to kind of feel things out. I do a lot of homework and prep work before I get there, but then it's also so much of it is like, who are the other people in the scene and how does that unfold? And how does what they're giving to me make me react? And we kind of find which path then feels the best for that. Um, and I also think it's really fun to try it a different way every single time in rehearsal. Um, and on camera, consistency is like really, really necessary for editing. So, you know, even though I'm trying to be conscious of it now, and some directors have different, different shows have different amounts of flexibility, but um, sometimes like I know the scene I was just doing, they said, hey, in this last take, you put your hand up here, don't do
Hmm.
that. Or actually, we like that. So keep that. So now you need to put your hand here on that line, like every single
Oof.
time. And so as a theater actor, that is just like a different technique, because as a theater actor, I like to like absolutely not be thinking about what I'm looking like at all. Because I feel like in some ways that's like the death of creativity if you're like looking at yourself from the
Hmm.
outside rather than just being in it. But that I think it's sort of a necessary technique on camera. So sometimes I feel like my choice just becomes to like don't do anything
Don't do anything so that
because
you can repeat it, so you're not stuck in
yeah,
a
you know
yeah.
what I mean. I mean, and not like don't do anything in terms of like your acting, but just in terms of the physicality. Like
Yeah.
the more still you can be, I think is better.
And what did you use any kind of technique, or what was your strategy? So I can imagine that exact, okay, I have to put my, for those who are listening, she put her sort of fist under her chin in that example. And so when you have to put your fist under your chin again, how do you keep it alive and discover it like it's the first time, as opposed to sort of playing that result, right? What did you do in that moment when the director says that? Oh, we like that. Now, how do you sort of keep it alive as if it's a rehearsal, as if it's happening for the first time?
I mean, then in a way, it feels like a performance, just like if you're, if you're doing a choreography or something where you do the same sort of movement every time and you have to make it seem motivated and fresh every
Hmm.
time. So it becomes a bit more like that, I guess.
What about, this is maybe very similar in terms of, I guess, the kind of acting, but when last we chatted, we were in 2021, still reeling and in the middle of a pandemic. Now here we are in 2024, and sort of self tapes are stubbornly here to stay. I think they've become the industry. In the past couple of years, I guess you've had a few Zoom auditions, precious few in-person auditions, and then just like hundreds and hundreds of self tapes. So, are there any kind of secrets in terms of your success of self tapes, and when you're getting an audition, is there anything concrete that you go, this has really helped me, both in terms of efficiency but also just in terms of stuff that's worked acting wise for you when you look at self tapes?
Um, I mean, the more prepared I can be, I guess just like what I was talking about, it, you do have the ability to see what you're sending in as
Hmm.
opposed to a theater audition where it's live and you're like, I don't know, it felt good, or it felt terrible, but maybe I'm wrong. Um, so I think sometimes, if you have the luxury of time, it's awesome to do like a practice round of auditions for yourself, like do a self tape and be ready to send it in, but then be ready to watch it and go, oh, I see. Oh, yeah. Like sometimes, you and I will say sometimes as we're watching back, like, I'll say, that wasn't an acting choice. Like that was a sigh because I was trying to remember my line or whatever.
Hmm.
Like if you have the luxury of time to then redo the tape, which I usually don't. But I guess I've learned that you kind of just have to let some of that go, um, and hope that that's enough. Hope that everyone else is kind of in the same boat with the same amount of time to
Hmm.
turn it around, and um, that your sort of imperfections in terms of line accuracy or timing or certain things like that are not going to cost you the job if you are in fact exactly what they're looking for.
I think of you as someone who's so good at like the self tape technique. Is there like, even when you get as granular as like eye line, like something often you'll be like, I need to take in because I just think my eye was what didn't quite make sense as I was tracking that. Like, is that something you're figuring out as you're memorizing your lines? Are you noting that in your script of like, okay, this person is going to live upper left of the phone. This person's going to live, obviously we need to see your eyes for the most part. So it's not, no one's living behind you, but even just the way that you'll track that often, for those who haven't done a lot of self tapes, you might have 3, 4, 5 characters in a scene. Even if it's three, it's going to be a lot to track of where are all these people. How are you sort of thinking about that relative to the phone or to your backdrop, or, as you're sort of making those choices to go, that doesn't quite work. Doesn't look different enough on camera.
Yeah, I definitely plan that out. I think as I'm preparing the scene, it's like, okay, how many people are there? You basically you put everyone on two sides,
Hmm.
of the camera. So the camera's like in the middle and you're either looking to the left or to the right. Um, in a scene, if there are like five people, that's, I don't know, you can kind of get away with, I think, just choosing two different places to look.
Hmm.
At least that's what I say. I don't know. Um, but yeah, I'm really conscious about that. I think I've learned that, but back from the days when I would go in and I'd be in the room, sometimes I would get that note like,
Mhm.
okay, that was great. Let's do it again. Just this time, when you're looking to this person over here, don't look so far over here.
Mhm.
Look pretty, because it's just all pretty, it's smaller than I realized, I think, initially
Mhm.
when I was first doing it.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it's a little tricky for young actors not getting necessarily that level of feedback. If you're not lucky enough to have somebody who's giving you, taking an on-camera class or getting necessarily that level of feedback at a classroom level, I think you lose something not getting to work with casting directors in the room in the same way that we got to early in our career. That's a
yeah.
frustration.
Yeah. Although I would say something like that, something that's technical like that, you can really self-correct. Like
Hmm.
that's what I'm still doing now. I watch it because sometimes, it's really just about the eyes sometimes, and so that's just like a technical thing. Like, oh, just move your eyes when you're looking at that person. Don't turn and look like they're all the way
Hmm.
over here, like they might actually be.
Hmm.
Um, because you'll
And
watch it back and you're like, oh, now the camera is really only seeing like the side of your face instead of.
do you feel like is it helpful for you to like imagine that the person is actually moving to that spot, or are you just thinking I'm looking at a spot? It's kind of similar to often with college auditions. We'll be like, are you picturing an actual face back there, or are you looking at a spot on the wall and actually just imagining your mom? But are you actually picturing like are you? I guess how much are you visualizing the different characters actually being on the side of the phone, or you're going, I know I'm talking to this character and I'm looking at a corner of a phone or whatever.
I think it's too many things for me to be like conjuring a face
Yeah,
and a scene,
yeah,
and the emotional life of it. But as I go through and I'm mapping like the acting beats, I am going, okay, what scenario is that in my own life, or what can I use as a substitute, or if it's, just what is the basic intention and emotion. That stuff is the same for plays or for on camera stuff.
totally.
um and I'm definitely, that I think is the for me, that is like the most important part, even more than the line accuracy,
Hmm.
is like what's going on in this scene, and what
Hmm.
are these relationships, and why did they choose this scene for an audition? What's it
Hmm.
showing about this character? If there's more than one scene, like what difference are you supposed to show them between the two scenes?
Yep, that's well said. What about just from a preparation perspective? I think I've said it before, but it's something that I think you do so well in the way that I think you approach hair, makeup, costume in terms of all that kind of stuff. How do you think about what you're going to bring to a self tape? Obviously you're not going out and buying new costumes for each of these self tapes to come in, but what do you think in terms of like how you're going to present yourself on camera when you get a different role? Like what are you reading or what are you taking in, and then what's making you think, okay, this is the woman I'm bringing out. I mean, you're someone who can play 25 years old and currently playing a grandmother on screen, so you're really showing a lot of range, I think, based on the makeup that you're wearing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
uh Yeah, I mean, you'll hear it said a lot, like, don't don't make the people watching the tape, like, have to use their imagination to imagine you in this,
Hmm.
because you just want to show them as much as you can, like, I'm this.
Hmm.
So I think that's like part of the, I don't know, I think it's fun. I suppose some people think it's like really annoying in the way that I think the technical stuff is annoying, but I think like the playing dress up part is fun. Um, so, going into your closet and going, okay, what makes sense for what would this person be wearing,
Hmm.
and how would this person be fixing their hair, and how would they be doing their makeup? All of that is really specific because it tells you so much about a person.
Hmm. Yep, it's well said. What about, and then it's another kind of superpower of yours, I think, is the self tape slate. Leo just did a great video as we're recording this on you talking about college edition slates and how important it is to be able to walk in the room and like, this is me. Hi, I'm Charlie. It's so nice to meet you. Um, it's something that I think you do so well in sort of bringing your personality onto the slate and within the kind of limits of technical requirements. I feel like you often kind of have fun with it. What do you think about it? Is that something that you watch someone do? Is it something you just started doing, or what? How do you approach that in terms of your own self-tape slates for different kinds of roles?
I don't know. I've never watched anyone else do it. I think I just started having fun with it because it felt so silly. Like particularly the full body slate. It just
Hmm.
feels like why. Because most of the time, it's just they just want to see your essence. I think
Hmm.
like what's your whole being like. But it's funny because on camera, you really usually are only seeing like the face, basically.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, depends, but so I think I just felt awkward being like, here's my full body.
Hmm.
So I just started kind of doing silly things with that. And then my agents and manager would watch my tapes back and be like, make comments like they liked my slates. So um, I just kept it
You kept
up.
doing it. But it does seem like you maybe do modulate it a little bit for the type of a project. Like the more comedic or fun the character, it does seem like you might be a little more silly and fun, where you still might be free, but if it's a pretty dramatic role, you're not going to be goofy in the same way. Is that fair?
Oh, yeah. Yes, definitely. I think it's always great to show personality just in terms of like, I don't like a lot of the characters I audition for are not the nicest people.
Hmm.
So I think like I don't necessarily want to be in character when I'm slating
Yep.
for that. I want to come across as someone who hopefully would be nice to work with.
Yep.
Um, but then I don't need to be like goofy
Hmm.
if it's something that's serious. But yeah, if it's comedy, then I think it's a great place to kind of just be your silly self.
Yep, totally makes sense. Right? It's another place you're asking them not to have to do too much work in their imagination of sort of thinking, God, she was doing so much act. If we meet this sort of goofy, fun, silly person, and then it's like you're playing one of the many crying moms that you've played or whatever. It's like it almost maybe makes the tape we just watched feel less genuine or less. I don't know. It can maybe feel disconcerting to watch those two things in contradistinction.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's we've done our that's our vegetables. We've eaten our vegetables. We've had some
Oh,
serious conversations. We're gonna get a little bit
delish.
looser and goofier on the back end of the break. We're gonna let some listeners bloop 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 through a couple ads, and we'll be right back. Okay, we're back, and now I have my first semi-challenging question for you. These have all been easy so far, right? Do you agree?
Oh,
These are just
yikes. Okay.
rote,
Yeah.
easy questions. Okay, here we go. So, as you know, I ask a lot of artist guests kind of I try to narrow in on like what is a superpower, what's something that they do really well that maybe not every artist does, what's something that they really know about maybe in ways that not every other artist does. Like with our friend Sean Allen Krill, we talked about generosity on stage. With Celia Keenan Bolger, we talked about vulnerability. And I've often asked you when we're prepping a podcast, or if I'm prepping a podcast and you know the guest, I'll be like, what do you think this person's superpower is? Or I'll say, does that sound right to you based on what you know of them? Does that feel like it's a good superpower? So you may be anticipating the question for yourself. What do you think your superpower is? What do you think if I were to ask Elizabeth Stanley, this is her superpower that she knows about more than maybe other artists? What do you think that is?
I mean, I don't know about knowing about more than other artists, but
Or just know
uh,
something about, have some unique perspective
well,
on, not more than necessarily, but.
I feel like uh, I've been able to play lots of very different characters.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that feels both like a luxury, but also, yeah, a little bit of a superpower to be sort of um, be able to play like someone like Claire de Lune, who was absolutely batty
Mm-hmm.
and funny and really like kind of broad comedy. Um, and then do something like Mary Jane, um, which was much more dramatic.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Is that the kind of superpower you mean?
Sure. I mean, there's no limit to what superpowers can be. They can be anything. But what do you think enables you to do that? Like, why do you think? Because I think a lot of actors really strive for that. Certainly, it's something that a lot of guests, you know, they'll often have a resume that looks like a lot of this, blink, 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 a lot of the same kind of ish roles. And they're often talking about, yeah, I want to break out of that shell. I want to do this. I want to show that I have more range than what I've been playing so far. What do you think has enabled you to play such a wide range?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it is luck and timing. I think um, I didn't really know what my own sort of abilities necessarily were when I moved to New York. Like, I hadn't really been cast in like comedic roles,
Mm-hmm.
hadn't really been cast in like belty roles. Uh, I think I was kind of like, oh, okay. And so I just like auditioned for absolutely everything. And so it just kind of revealed itself to me like, oh, I was getting called back for this ingenue, and then I was getting called back for this sort of like sexy, sassy person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it just gave me the confidence, I think, to be able to be a shapeshifter. Um, and then I think some of it was timing in that, like, um, it was still like, it was pre social media. It was pre, uh, like YouTube was still like pretty new.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so like if someone hadn't seen your performance of something, then they didn't necessarily know who you were or
Uh-huh.
what you could do. And so I think like I wasn't typed like immediately
Mm-hmm.
um as, oh, she's the person who does this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um and I think that that worked to my benefit, that I wasn't like famous
Yep.
or um super findable
Mm-hmm.
on online. Um,
You're still not. When we researched your bio for this, you're missing like 6 roles. I mean, I have a note for you to update your bio online. It's really, I mean, it's still very difficult to find. Uh, but I might also add in, it seems like the fact that you have a certain level of vocal versatility is unique and maybe allows you, just within the traditional musical theater canon, that you can play more operatic sounding characters, you can play belty characters, that your voice at least is not limiting the kind of characters that you might shine in. Might be another little version of that superpower too.
yeah, yeah. Thank you. I guess that's true. I do think that's where it again. I sort of like found it in a backwards way, but my degree really is in music, and so I
Hmm.
feel in the realm of musical theater, I feel like a very strong musician. And that I can learn quickly. I understand it. I can read music. I could teach it to myself. I can play it on the
Hmm.
piano, sort of, mostly. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that whatever that is, that um, has translated also, yeah, into being able to sort of do different vocal styles and sing in a variety of ways.
Yep. And I wonder, one of the things, one of my I was sort of, how would I answer this question for you? Of course, I made you do the work because that's what I'm going to do on this podcast. You pick your own superpower. But I was thinking, I was like, I wonder if you'll talk about your drive, meaning like do I think have a remarkable work ethic. Uh, you really are able to push yourself. Um, but I also feel like maybe it's a bit of a superpower, kind of combination of powers, is like you're able to do that. You're able to be hungry in a really, I think, in a competitive way that is mixed with just the right balance of like grace and kindness. And like I do think there's a version of like the hungry musical theater actor where you're like, uh-oh, watch out, that's not necessarily the best person to be within the room. But you do need to have the hunger and the drive to like have a standard to hold yourself to and be able to work hard and be able to go, I can work those million side jobs and I'm willing to pound the pavement. It feels like you have, maybe it's not a unique mix, but I think you have a really good mix of those two things. Maybe that's comes from the music background of going, I know what it is to practice for hours a day. And dancers sometimes have that, but actors don't always have that. Like, I know what it is to like put the quote unquote technique work in hours and hours a day. Do you feel like that's a fair characterization of a superpower too?
Just my ability to be like studious. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean to work hard, and you do have a high standard for yourself. You do you no, it can sound better. You know what? All right, I've worked the 3 hours. My voice is tired. I should stop now. Like it's like you have a seems like you have enough system for yourself of the ability to work hard and work smart. Um, yeah, but that I think what's maybe kind of unique about that, or what I think is great about that, is that you have that without seeming like a technician, without seeming like no. I don't think people would see that hunger. I think I only discovered that from you living with you, as opposed to necessarily you don't seem like somebody who's like, man, I'm sharpening the axe, grinding the axe all night. Like you seem like you walk in and you make it feel pretty effortless.
Oh, Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think it performance for me is more fun when I am prepared. So, and that definitely goes for auditions. Like I
Hmm.
remember really learning that sort of it was a turning point for me, I think, in auditioning. It was like after because when I first moved here, I was like, I just never had any extra cash. So I never like took class or studied with anyone. And then I remember like going to auditions like after I had started taking class, like where in class I would work on the audition
Hmm.
and then I would go to the audition and be like, I nailed that because what I had practiced, which is sort of impossible to practice on your own, was doing the thing in front of people.
Hmm.
So like that part of the nerves was less. Um and the sort of the adrenaline of like, oh, this is what came up in the moment when I was like performing it for people. Um, I was already informed by that from when I had done it in class.
Uh-huh.
And then I had that information to go in and just like make those choices that I found in the audition. And I also, um, I think then I'd become like used to the the fun game of like, oh, how different could you do it in class? Like the teacher
Hmm.
asked you to do it this way, and like, and that became fun rather than feeling like sort of stuck in the one way that you learned it
Hmm.
and it's hard to get out of. Because I definitely remember feeling like it was hard to take adjustments when I first
Yeah.
started auditioning, um, and sometimes hard to get past the nerves.
Yep. Hard to get out of the
So
mindset of doing it right too, of thinking the director saying, "Oh, that's the way you want me to do it. Okay, let me make it 10% more this," like you're trying to get an A on the audition. When often
yeah,
they're discovering with you too. They don't even necessarily know, is it this? They're really throwing it at you. Sometimes not. Sometimes they are saying, "I want it to be this," and can you do it? But it feels like it's our mindset, especially as good students. And I know I didn't say that you're a valedictorian, but Elizabeth Stanley's a valedictorian, for ladies and gentlemen. But that as a good student, it can be tough to be like, right, I'm not trying to get an A here. We are trying to create together and let it be something different in the room as opposed to exactly what this person's asking for.
yeah, and I think that was just something to learn by trying it and doing it and learning like, oh, the best results were always when I just like let myself be bold,
Mhm.
when I let
Mhm.
myself be free, when I wasn't like self-critiquing as I was going, but what I was really sure of were the sides, was the
Mhm.
material I was bringing in. I
Mhm.
knew the song really well. I knew the scenes really well. So then I could play when I was in the room. I wasn't like stuck just trying to remember the technical side.
Totally.
I feel like
What
we took a
about
tangent, but
no, a good tangent. I love. What about when you see younger actors? I'd love to, sort of, you mentioned sometimes you'll whether it's a student that you've worked with, or just when you see someone, you go, you're at a concert, you're at something, you're working with a 22-year-old, 24-year-old actor, maybe many of our listeners around that age. What makes you think this person's going to be successful? When you just sort of have that feeling of like, I'm watching out for this person. What do you think in 2024 a young actor needs to have? Which could be the same as it was back then, could be different. But what do you when you see a young actor, you go, that person's really they've got it. What is making you watch out for them? What is making you sort of identify them and pull them out from the pack?
hmm, there's so many different things. I think it's always inspiring to me to see young people who are like really curious. They're really curious about the other actors in their company. Um, both professionally, like, oh, you're 20 years older than me, and like, oh, so what was your experience like? Not like,
Hmm.
oh, you're better or smarter or whatever, but just like, what has your life been like as an artist?
Hmm.
Um, it just that just kind of communicates to me, I think that that is a young person who's maybe understands that it's like a long game. They're not like looking for the quick and easy, like
Mhm.
brass ring to grab and then, never let go of, which doesn't really exist.
Mhm.
Um, but also someone who is able to work hard, is able to like be prepared, but then also like be flexible in the moment and um like able to kind of take care of themselves as an artist, I guess. Like, and I mean that in like all the different ways. Like
Mhm.
they're they're living in the messiness of life like we all are, but they're able to kind of juggle it. They're able to maybe have their side job or deal with their roommates who may or may not be awesome, and deal with the romantic pursuits that they're having, um, deal with the stressful auditions that are exciting, but like the stakes are high as they're coming in. Like it's a lot of things to hold as a young person. And I think, sometimes I see people like they just get really sidetracked or
Mhm.
overwhelmed by some element of life, which is understandable. But I think as an artist, if you're able to keep holding on to the art itself, the reason why you love doing this,
Mm.
while these other things of life are always spinning around you, as they always will be. But if you're able to kind of keep digging in, keep loving coming to the rehearsal room, keep loving coming to the stage, keep loving coming to the cast,
Mhm.
um, that to me, I see and I'm like, oh, that person's like, they're gonna stick around.
Mhm. How did you navigate that? I mean, of course, a long career. Let's say we're halfway through our career, realistically. You got another 20 good years in you, 23 good years in you. I don't know, whatever. But in midpoint of this career, and there's been amazing ups, there's been downs, right? There's been probably some near misses, some what ifs, right? How have you navigated some of those, the heartbreaks and the thrills, and like, I guess, how have you maintained and stayed um, as sort of consistent as an artist? I see, by the way, for people watching YouTube, this is a painting that Elizabeth paints all by
Oh dear,
herself. My
I don't.
gosh.
They might not be admiring it, so
No,
let's
they're admiring
just.
it. They might not know what it is, but they're definitely admiring the brushstrokes. The size, at least,
You
is
could say it
impressive,
was
if
our
nothing else.
child that did it,
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly
and
right.
that
It
would
kind of
be.
was. But how have you navigated those up and down? I mean, most recently, not too long ago, your agency folded, and now you've got it. I mean, not long before that, your management company split. Like, there's been also, I'm sure, some self tapes that we thought, this is the book. We're going to book this one. This is going to change our life financially and in every way or whatever. Like, how do you continue that? I mean, still 20 years in, and those still are happening by the year. How do you navigate that? How do you sort of keep it steady for yourself?
Uh, I mean, I think sometimes they're better than others, right? Like I definitely go through spells where I feel pretty down and um, discouraged. I think it's important to like acknowledge when you're feeling that way. Um, not not so that you can stay there, but so that you can be clear again about your why of like, do I still want to do this? Do I
Mm-hmm.
like this? Is it worth it for me um, to go through these hard parts about it? Um, and if the disappointment or the inconsistency or I don't know all of the things that are kind of hard about this business um, aren't like they're keeping me from living a full life, then how do I change?
Mm-hmm.
What do I which path do I go down instead that might be right next door? Sorry, might be right next door to the path I'm on. So I think I'm kind of always assessing that. Um,
Yeah, I think people would be surprised how often, at least I've heard you ask that question of, is this still worth it to me? Do I still want to do it? And for some times, I would think like, is she really asking that question? Like, I'm like, you're so successful. How could you? Why could you feel that way? How could you feel that way? But I do wonder if it's almost just a touchstone for you of coming back to going, let me reconnect to my why. Let me make sure I have that fire, and it's fueling me. I think I've just been surprised. Obviously, during the pandemic was one particularly trying instance for I think a lot of actors and artists, but just that I think you do come back to that fire a lot. You do come back to your why. Um, I've observed that a lot and going, this is really interesting. It's I don't know that every 22-year-old actor is going to think, well, Elizabeth Stanley needs to keep doing that and keeps checking in 5 Broadway shows in, but certainly I've observed that is true.
well, I think it's always true because, we're always growing. Our lives are always changing. Every, you know, your relationships with your parents change, and your relationships with your friends change, and your romantic life changes, and then maybe you become a parent. Like, there are just so many things that shape us and change us, and some of those things are big and affect the way that we need to live our day to day. And so I
Hmm.
think, like, that's part of what always kept me assessing. I think, like, for me, sometimes I would get to certain points in my life where I felt like, for the longest time as a young person, like, doing theater was like the one thing that I just loved so much, and like singing, I just loved those things so much. They were absolutely the most important things in my life.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, it's hard because sometimes you're like, oh, am I going to go to this friend's wedding, or am I going to take this job? And um, but for me, it was like the job was so fun. It was so
Hmm.
fun, that it made those hard choices still worth it.
Hmm.
Um, but then I do think, like, I got to a point where I was like, wow, like, I feel really good about the things I've achieved in my professional life, but like, my personal life is like, I just keep not quite figuring it out. Like,
Hmm.
I'm not I'm not meeting the right person. And now I feel like I really want that part of my life to have more creativity and more abundance in it. And
Hmm.
so I think, like, there were times when I made decisions like, you know what, I'm not going to work out of town as much because I want to try and meet someone, and I want to try and meet someone who lives in New York,
Hmm. Who lives on the Upper
and
West Side and is gonna bike
whose name
sweaty
is
to our
Charlie
first date.
Murphy.
Yeah.
Um, so that was a change that was happening. And then I think, again, like, a big change was becoming a parent, and now,
Hmm.
like, my career thoughts are different again, and I
Hmm.
imagine that will keep changing as my kid gets older. So I just think it's always good to check in.
Hmm.
I think the other thing that sort of keeps me sane is, like, well, two things, like, just really keeping a gauge, a watchful eye on the amount of, like, social media I'm
Hmm.
consuming. Um, I basically hate social media. I don't want to even be on it. Like, I don't love posting. I don't love it feels like a chore to me, if I'm
Hmm.
honest. Um, but I know that it's something that is useful for me as an actor. So it definitely feels like, okay, this is like part of my job to do this. Um, and I always have notes for myself that I could be better at it. But I think I also know that then if I am just on it and I'm just scrolling through it, I don't leave feeling better.
Yep.
So that's like, don't I try not to do that to myself.
Yep.
Um, and then, yeah, the other thing I think, like you're saying, with this beginner huge painting, is investing. my creativity in other art forms
Mhm.
that are not the way I'm trying to make a living.
Not to mention therapy 3 times a day, lots of therapy.
3 times a day.
Yeah. Last time we were on the podcast, we did play the newlywed game, despite not yet being technically newlywed. We're not going to play it again. I won't put you through it once again. But do we need to play a version of the honeymoon game, given that we just
Oh
came
dear.
back from our honeymoon? No, we're not going to really play a game. But we just tell the listeners they want to hear what's the most wonderful part about going on a honeymoon with
Oh,
me.
just spending time with Charlie Murphy.
But see, you say it like sarcastically. They're going to think you're joking, but you mean that for real.
Just spending time with Charlie Murphy.
See, it sounds like like I'm your jailer and you're trapped into that answer. Like I've forced you to say that answer.
I'm
She's
blinking.
blinking. Yeah, for the YouTube
Um,
viewers, she's blinking 3 times. Yeah.
no, you know what? It was so great. I think as an artist, again, not even as an artist, as anyone in this world,
Mm,
it's really hard to like carve out multiple days in a row where you're not going to be checking your email
mm.
and replying to every text that you get, and just all of the responsibilities that we all have. So it really felt like a great luxury to just take that time
Yep.
and spend that time together. And um,
I think a lot of artists don't give themselves vacations, right? They often, so well, I got a trip here, and so that becomes a vacation, and but there is something, I definitely agree. Like by day 4, I was just like thinking differently. My mind was working differently, not being trapped in emails and responsibilities in the same way. Like just literally being able to slow down that much. And I think, especially, I know as a young actor, the first 10 years, I didn't take a vacation. What if that's the time I'm going to book? I mean, like Christmas, I guess. But other than that, it would be like, nope, I can't give myself that luxury because this could be the time when I would needed that sweat equity or needed that, but I do think there's a lot to be gained by slowing down when we can.
yeah, I mean, and it's again, it was like a huge luxury to be able to take a trip like we did. Because I think also as a young artist, like I didn't have like extra money to be like
Hmm.
flying somewhere and going on a vacation. Um, but I still think like you can take a vacation to go visit your parents or
Totally.
to go visit a friend or just like take a
Take a
weekend
break.
and
Yeah.
just put your out of office message on and
Yep.
stay home even
Yep.
and just be like I'm taking a break. Though I will say a change of physical scenery I think is helpful.
I just want you to point out that all of the things you mentioned have nothing to do with how great it was to be on a honeymoon with me. So you did really effectively not. You gave a beautiful, helpful answer, but didn't really answer the question for our listeners who really are curious about me. She's blinking again. She's blinking. People. She's forth. No,
No,
I
I
won't make
mean,
any separate serious.
honestly, it was so awesome to be able to spend time together in a way like we talked about. We haven't been able to do since before the pandemic, just because of the timing of our lives. Getting engaged like just before the pandemic started meant that
Yep.
we didn't take special trips together like we were planning to take during that time, and then uh, we chose to have a family, and so
Mm.
then our it's the three of us
The three
instead
of
of
us
the
now.
two of us. And so it felt really special that we were able to do that.
You sure did. All right, one more short break, and then we have a surprise third section coming up. So get hyped for that.
Oh my.
All right, we are back with a now snacking Elizabeth Stanley. So we'll let her crunch while I ask you a nice long question to sort of clear the pipes. You're working on a cold, and now there's snacks in there. It's a lot going on for those vocal cords. Okay, so this another question about being my wife. Leo often refers to me as his work husband, but I do think sharing a small apartment with me, sound insulation or not, you have become a true MTCA wife. You've really started to learn the ways of MTCA. You're married into the MTCA family. You're basically our first lady. I guess Solvay's and the heir apparent or whatever. But here's what I want to ask you. Okay, so from having watched her through the bedroom door, many years of this process from start to finish, What do you think you've absorbed about it as different from your own experience? So you'd already taught students before we met, but you often would say things that, like at TPAP, you'd say things like, "Oh, talk to Charlie about that. I don't know anything about the college process." It was early on, but now I think you can no longer say you don't know anything about the college process. What are the things you hear me repeat the most from your perspective? What have you learned in terms of going, I guess it's this. I guess this is what's going on in 2024.
Um, I mean, I definitely, my experience was different. I didn't audition for hardly any schools comparatively to
Mm,
what it seems like is necessary now. Um, I didn't cast a very wide net. I kind of stayed within the Midwestern region. Um, and it seems like that for me just was sort of like, oh, that's what I did. But feels like a lot of your families, that's more of like an intentional thought. Like some
mm-hmm,
students are like, hey, I really want to stay this many miles from my family, or I want to go really far away, or whatever.
mm-hmm,
It feels like that's a little more thoughtful than my situation was.
mm-hmm,
Um, I also was like doing things from the classical musical repertoire, so like the choosing of rep was very
mm-hmm.
different, um, and the amount of stuff I had to prepare was totally different.
Yep.
Um, yeah, and I also think like in the classical music world, for me, and again, this is probably different in that world too now, but um, there was not as much of an emphasis on like who are you as a person. Like we
Uh-huh.
want to we want to know that like you're going to be a great classmate who's a good person and also eager to learn. And um, I think for me, it felt more like, am I doing this right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
There's more of a right
am
or
I
wrong rubric of, am I the right kind of opera singer? Am I the right kind of?
like, am I
Yes.
talented and am I doing this
Mm-hmm.
correctly?
Mm-hmm.
Was what it felt like the test was.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Where now
and
you would hear the test as more of a, who are you as a human being kind of test.
yeah, I feel like what it seems like what your students are striving for is to definitely like showcase their talents to the best of their abilities, um, but also to really, really show's not the right word, to really, really be present, I guess, in themselves so that they can just shine as the person that they are,
Mm.
uh, rather than like a sheen of like, this is what it's supposed to be, which then I don't know. It's not very interesting. I think then it's hard for anyone to stand out if we're all trying to be the same thing. So it
But
really feels like I hear you constantly being curious about who is this student and what are they looking for, and then what kind of material is going to suit them so that in the audition process they feel comfortable, and also people that are like schools are going to see them for who they are.
that is a very flattering and I feel like surprisingly accurate, at least to my own impression of like how I would describe it, reflection. So that's so it's working through the bedroom door. Whatever you're absorbing in your sleep, as I'm doing this while you sleep in the other room, it's really working. Do we need to give the listeners an impression of me doing an initial consultation? You have said before you think you could do an entire MTCA initial consultation, despite having never looked at notes or seen anything. You think you could do it. Do you have a good Charlie? Do you have a good 1 minute?
Yeah. Okay, let's see here. Oh, sorry, I'm late. Sorry, I'm late. Uh, wow. Okay, so let's see. I see we've got a mom here. We've got a Charlie. Um, okay. So mom, if you could describe Charlie, what would you say? How would you describe Charlie?
This is so much worse than I thought it was going to be.
Oh, Charlie is the most wonderful.
Uh
I
huh.
would say he's really dedicated. He's
Hmm.
really,
This is now
um,
my mother. Yeah.
he's very civilized.
Mhm.
He's
Proper young
great
man.
with language. Um, okay. I mean, of course, I'm biased, but, uh, and then you would say, Okay, and Charlie, how would you describe yourself?
Mm. Oh,
Mm.
and I would say, I give you an answer. You want me to do my own impressions in the middle of your
Then you would
impression?
say,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess like what my mom said is pretty true,
Mm.
but I think like I would also say that I'm like a good friend and um okay, that will go on. And then
Okay, I'm
uh
cutting this off. This is too terrible. This is too sweaty for me to have to endure this all. That was pretty good. That was pretty good. I'd never asked the parent to describe themselves before the kid. The order would have been reversed, but everything else was pretty accurate there. And in your
oh,
impression,
dang it.
it's pretty good. Yeah, the me being late is probably the most true part of all of it. What do you think as parents now? Like, we talked about this kind of, but not really. Like, you know, what if, God forbid, Solvay does say she wants to be an actress? Like, what is your first gut reaction hearing that? And then, like, what advice do you think you would give her as she navigates this crazy biz? If she, assuming, I think we'd agree that we would be like, okay, great, we'll support you. Wouldn't be like, no, you have to do STEM. Um, what would you say? Like, what would you want to tell her as someone, neither of our
It's
parents, of course, were in the
first of
business.
all, it's STEAM,
Oh,
Charlie.
STEAM. Thank you. Yeah.
So the arts are included.
No, I don't think so. But if I say you have to do STEM, then I don't think it would, as in contradistinction to the arts, who wants to do
She say,
arts.
no, dad, it's STEAM, and I'm going to be an actor.
Yeah.
Um, well, first of all, I know you were joking when you're like, oh, God forbid, but I think it would be a huge compliment because I think one of the things I worry about as a parent is that, it is a profession that in some ways forces you to be a bit selfish
Hmm.
because like the schedule is, you're not always in control of it.
Yep.
Um, and so I hope that like she's not going to be scarred by um, having an artist mom who I think is going to be different than if I were pursuing something more
Hmm.
traditional.
Hmm.
So it would be a huge compliment. It would be a great joy. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's like as long as it is making you happy, then keep doing it.
Yep. And if she's 14, like, what would we be like? Okay, what are we gonna have you do? Of course, she'll be going using MTCA, of course, for her college auditions. But like, what would you be thinking about? Like, okay, so like as a young person, because actually, I think a surprising amount of our parent listeners are maybe anticipating college auditions, but have 13, 14 to 12, 11-year olds who they know are interested. If you're in that place of like, what would you be thinking? Here we are in New York City. We have this mecca of all this art around us. Like, what if she was like, Mom, I want some help, like getting better at this? What would you be have? What would we have her do? What would we be doing for her to say, let's help you, sort of put you on a path to success in this industry?
Um, I mean, I think always like taking class, studying with a variety of people is sometimes a great idea because I think, especially when you're young, oh, I don't know. For me, every teacher I had, I admired so much and I looked up to so much. And so everything that they said was like, oh, the Holy Grail. And I think art is not something that there's only one correct way to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think casting a wide net. Um, I also think like, okay, you're interested in this. Like you're interested, like if she's interested in dance, I would say like, great, let's take a bunch of different kinds of dance and
Uh-huh.
see if one is more fun than the other for you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just the ability to be, uh, to keep changing and growing within it,
Mm-hmm.
I think, um, is important. And also to like consume art,
Mm-hmm.
watch different, read different books and watch different indie films and go see theater when you can. Like you don't have to be in New York, like anywhere that you are, just taking it in watching things that are free. It doesn't have, nothing has to be like fancy, but it all is informing you.
Yep. Yep. I'm so glad you said that last part, because I do think some aspect of that I would want to be like, if you want to be an artist, especially an actor, whether it's an actor, singer, dancer, but you want to be a performing artist, I do think what you are intaking in terms of sort of other interests you're cultivating, what are the things that you're bringing to the table that aren't just your technique as an actor, singer, dancer, especially as an actor. It's like, what is acting technique at 13 years old is hard to tell. And so it's like, what you could be growing as an interesting human being. And of course, I think that's easier said than done in terms of how do you founder that as parents. But I think I would be like, that's as important to me. If I'm like, okay, she really is going to go into this business, I'm like, cool. What kind of person is she, and what kind of voice is she going to have, and in terms of what she's going to want to say about herself, but also just about art and all that kind of stuff. Like, I'm interested in. It's an interesting question of like how we would cultivate that, or
Oh,
yeah.
I mean, I think like, I do also think helping her to find discipline in
Mm-hmm.
practicing is really essential. I mean, you'll hear artists across every genre, I
Mm-hmm.
think, say that. Like, I have to be disciplined. I have disciplined. I have to carve out time for myself to write every day or to
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is. Like, it takes discipline.
Right. There's no
I
way
think
without the 10,000 hours to get there. You're
I
not gonna
think like
get
so
there.
that, and I think for most of us that's something that's learned.
Mm-hmm.
Um
Yeah, that's what I
so
meant by your superpower of drive. I think you really have discipline in a beautiful way. Maybe discipline might be a better word than drive, but I think you have it more than a lot of artists.
yeah, I mean, maybe I do think like my parents set me up really well for that.
Mm-hmm.
Um because I think so for me, I guess that it became fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I learned that I saw the results. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
when I practice a bunch, it's really fun because then I get to the next level,
Yeah.
like I get
Yeah.
better. So I mean, hopefully enabling her to find that joyful path as well. But I also think the other thing is just to have grace for
Mm-hmm.
yourself. There's so much that takes so much time
Mm-hmm.
to master, and I think it's so easy to kind of, and especially now when there's constant, you can constantly be comparing yourselves
Mm-hmm.
to the world because of the internet and social media and all of that. And so I think really just like understanding that it takes a long time to grow into your artistic self,
Mm-hmm.
and that there will be people who are shiny for whatever reason
Mm-hmm.
when they're 15. Um, and then there will be people who are not shiny until they're 50.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not an exaggeration.
You can't use the phrase "shiny" without evoking Moana too. Yeah,
Shiny. What's that?
exactly. Yeah, that's it. That's it. That's it. No, it's so well said, and I do think that's some of the. Just as you were saying that, I was sort of it was evoking in me like the God forbid I think I put there is not because I have some desire for her to do something else, but just like I think both you and I we know what some of that, the rejection and the pain and the judgment and the whatever, and that it's almost like as parents who know that it's harder to imagine like, oh, our poor girl's gonna have to go through that. I mean, I think some parents who don't still say, I know it's a hard industry, and that was some of my parents' reaction of going, oh, are you gonna be okay? And I feel that way still because I'm like, I know how hard it is. I know it's a difficult industry, and knowing some of the downs that you would experience as well as the ups. Um, it's hard to sort of watch your kid go through that. I mean, so many of our parents in the college process watch that with going, they know at the outset they're going to experience a lot of rejections, and it can be really hard as a parent to watch your kid have those boo boos is all we're experiencing right now. But those bigger boo boos, those emotional boo boos of getting your heart broken,
Yeah,
it's really hard.
it's really hard. I will say the thing that has eased that for me, which I would hope to be able to pass on, is just that like you are only in charge of what you do.
Yeah.
So did you stick to the practice like plan that you had?
Mm-hmm.
Did you put in the hours that you promised to yourself you would
Mm-hmm.
do? Did you feel like when you were in there, you gave it your all, like you did the best that you could do?
Yep.
That is the measure of like, how are you doing?
Yep.
And the rest is somebody else's opinion.
Right. Well, and also most people are not going to sail through their entire lives without hardship and rejection. And there's something kind of beautiful about creating resilient kids. And this industry certainly it tests your resiliency, but I think grows the muscle that is your resilience, your resiliency, whatever it is, but that makes you more resilient than you would be if you never experienced any kind of hardship. So in some ways, it's exciting to know, regardless of what your child ends up doing, that they'll sort of be have that not thicker skin, but have that tougher whatever underbelly that makes you go, I can endure this. I can feel the sadness, but I can endure this and move on and pick myself up and keep focusing on the parts that are I can control.
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you open yourself up for, you're vulnerable,
Yeah,
it's like a muscle that gets strengthened, and that's a useful muscle to have in life in
in life
general.
in general. All right, I know I can only do one more question because we've got to go pick our child up from daycare. Do you like how I say we've got to, even though it's you that's going to be going to do this? Um, in the past, I've sometimes talked about sort of where do you think the business is going, where do you think your career is going? I've asked different versions of the future, sort of vision board kind of question. I'd love to just throw out there like let's map out the next 20 years of your life. You're beautifully into a place where you are able to say no to some projects of going, I'm just not particularly interested in working on this. This isn't sparking joy for me. This isn't something that I'm like, this is my next Broadway show. I'm not necessarily feeling that, or I am feeling it with this one. What do you think in terms of what are the kinds of things? What's the kind of art that you feel like in 2025 and beyond that you're particularly interested in being in? It could also be stuff that you want to see. Like, what kind of art excites you that you go, I'd pay a babysitter and go see this show, or I would accept this role if it were given to me. Like, what kind of stuff do you want for the next 20 years of your life?
Um, Things that feel genuinely creative in terms of the production value. So, uh, I'm not really turned on by like a huge flashy set and um, a pre-existing song catalog while having been in shows that do those things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the more like Las Vegas a project feels, the less I am interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
And the more like acting class something feels,
Mm-hmm.
the more I'm going to be interested in it. The more that a project feels like they're doing something unique to theater. They're
Mm-hmm.
not trying to be a movie that's just on stage or a rock concert that's made into a play. Like they're doing something that can only be done on the stage. That is super exciting to me for theater.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Doing something that I just simply haven't done yet in my career is also super exciting and it's terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it could be like a cheesy, terrible project, like all the things I said, like I don't want to do that. But if something about it is like something I've never done,
Uh-huh.
like if it's a Shakespeare play that is Las Vegas style, I might be like, oh my God, count me in because I
Mm-hmm.
haven't professionally worked on Shakespeare. So that would
Mm-hmm.
be like terrifying and awesome.
Yeah.
Um,
You're just
I would
guaranteeing
love
that will be the next thing we're doing. Now it's going to be the Merchant of Vegas or whatever is going to be
great.
the next project.
Great.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, for me, like the dream would be to be doing things that either are in some way I'm able to take my family with me. Um, like, oh, we want you to come and do a show in the West End for 6 months or something. Something that's long enough that it's not like disruptive to
Mm-hmm.
my child because I feel like there's so much inconsistency in our lives that I'm more interested in consistency than I used to be. Um, yeah, and I mean I'm really digging all of the on-camera work I've gotten to do in the last several years. So I want to keep doing more. I'd love to be a series regular and
Hmm.
kind of feel what that is like to
Hmm.
live with a specific character for a long period of time.
I love it. All right. Anything we need to plug? We got P Valley's about to be released, the third season. You're all over it, playing a just beautiful grandmother, the role you were
Ruth Ann.
born to play. We have 9 coming to Broadway, right? Are we announcing that here on the pod?
That is
What
not happening.
Merchant of Vegas that's coming in spring of 2025 to Broadway? No. Anything else that we need people to check out for? I'll check you out on Instagram, where you'll hate yourself as you post our honeymoon photos at L Stands.
Yeah, L. Dot stands.
We love it. EL dot
Um,
stands. Get it right. Yeah.
yeah, no, I don't think there's anything else major to be promoting at this moment.
All right. Check out Stars and until the third act that's coming very soon when we bring you back on for a third time 3 years
Great.
from now. We'll check in. Thanks for
Okay.
coming on the pod, Beb. It was so nice to get to
Thanks,
chat with
Beb.
you across our apartment.
Likewise.
Bye.
Bye.